Can a poorly designed car ruin a whole season before arriving in the middle of the year? Ferrari is living in his own flesh with his SF-25, a car that promised a lot, but has disappointed everyone. Today I reveal the 5 most serious mistakes that are sinking the Italian team one by one. It all begins at the rear of the car, and in the case of Ferrari, it is there where one of its greatest design errors is located in 2025. The rear suspension of the SF-25, a pull rod system that should represent an evolution compared to the previous year, has turned out to be one of the most critical and harmful points of the car. This component, inherited in part of the SF-24 and conceived under the direction of the already absent Enrico Cardiel, drags a worrying structural weakness, a lack of stiffness that directly compromises the stability of the car at key moments, such as intense braking or aggressive inputs in curve. From the first kilometers of the shakedown in Firen, the engineers detected anomalous behaviors, but the magnitude of the consequences was not even understood, or worse, it was underestimated by the team. The result of this technical decision is devastating for pilots. The SF-25 becomes an unpredictable car when it enters a deceleration phase or faces medium and high-speed curves. The rear axle seems to move with an unwanted freedom, which breaks the general balance of the car and generates a constant sensation of insecurity for the pilot. This lack of control prevents both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, 2 pilots known for their aggressiveness and precision, can trust the car by attacking the vertex of the curve or when trying to squeeze the traction when leaving it. A car that does not transmit confidence in braking is a car that does not allow to exploit its potential, regardless of how competitive it may seem on paper. The architecture of this suspension is designed to facilitate the rear squat, that effect that in 2024 helped the SF-24 to maximize traction and reduce aerodynamic resistance. However, in SF-25, that same principle has become a source of problems. Instead of stabilizing the car and improving its efficiency, the new design has amplified the negative effects. It collapses the aerodynamic load, disturbs the general stability of the chassis, and eliminates any possibility of finding a behavior consistent throughout a batch. It is not a simple loss of performance. It is a systemic failure that affects every aspect of car handling. The most alarming thing is that this problem does not seem to have a quick or simple solution. The suspension is not a component that can be modified lightly during the season. It requires redesign, manufacturing, tests, and, above all, a perfect integration with the rest of the car. Ferrari is facing a huge technical dilemma. If you decide to rebuild this section, you must sacrifice time and resources and full struggle for points. If he does not, he condemns his pilots to compete with a car that has already shown to be unstable, unpredictable, and uncompetitive in front of his most direct rivals. Another of Ferrari SF-25's big problems has to do with its very operational window. This expression, although technical, is key to understanding why a car that seems competitive on paper ends up being so inconsistent on the track. An operational window refers to the range of conditions in which a Formula One car yields to its maximum potential. In the case of SF-25, that window is not only small, but practically disappears if a single variable is uncontrolled. Fred Vasseur has publicly admitted that the car has potential, but that it is extremely difficult to exploit it due to this rigidity in its behavior. It is enough for a temperature to change, that the asphalt has less rubber, or that a curve is more closed than expected for the car to completely lose its performance. Lewis Hamilton, who arrived in Ferrari as the star signing of the season, has been clear in his diagnosis. The SF-25 has an almost invisible operational window, which means that configuring this car has become a technical nightmare even for engineers with decades of experience. Finding the exact balance of equilibrium between the front and rear, adjusting the aerodynamics, calibrating the suspensions, and making the tires work in their ideal range is a task that barely has a margin of error. When everything is aligned, the car responds. But if a single element leaves its optimal range, the car becomes slow, nervous, and unstable. This is an especially dangerous characteristic when competing at the highest level, where even a tenth of a second can mean several positions on the grille. The SF-25 not only requires technical precision in the preparation, but also an enormous adaptation by the pilots. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton have had to modify their driving styles to try to find balance inside this volatile car. In Hamilton's words, every time the car leaves the box, it seems to behave differently, even if external conditions have not changed significantly. This type of unpredictable behavior frustrates both the pilots and the technical team, who are forced to start from scratch in each session. And when the calendar presents sprint weekends, where only a free practice is available before classification, the maneuver margin disappears completely. The most direct consequence of this situation is that Ferrari cannot be constant. While teams like McLaren or Red Bull manage to repeat good results thanks to a stable and predictable technical platform, Ferrari fights with a car that needs perfect conditions to shine. And that, in a sport as dynamic and variable as Formula One, is an almost definitive sentence. Without a wide operating window, any change of climate, configuration, or even type of curve can turn a competitive car into a completely inefficient one. The aerodynamic design of the Ferrari SF-25 was intended to offer greater freedom to engineers to experiment with more aggressive solutions, with the aim of approaching the performance of leading equipment such as Red Bull or McLaren. However, this ambition ended up translating into an unbalanced car. SF-25 aerodynamics is not only fragile, but also lacks an effective integration with the rest of the set. What should be a competitive advantage ended up being a constant source of instability, especially in career conditions, where predictable and efficient return behavior is required after return point. One of the most obvious symptoms of this aerodynamic failure is the collapse of the load at critical moments. When the car enters certain dynamic phases, such as sudden changes of direction or transitions between rapid and slow curves, aerodynamic load does not respond linearly. This means that the car loses grip in a sudden way without prior notice, something extremely dangerous for any pilot that is to the limit. This irregular behavior prevents the car from adapting correctly to different types of layout, generating a total lack of confidence in the general balance of the car. Leclerc and Hamilton have made it clear: you can't extract the maximum of a car that responds differently in each sector. Another key problem is the poor management of chassis heights in combination with aerodynamic flows. In theory, the aerodynamics of the car should work in synergy with the suspension and the height of the soil to maximize efficiency. In the case of SF-25, this system seems to be uncoordinated. At high speeds, where the soil effect should stabilize the car, the SF-25 suffers more than expected. And when the speed lowers, instead of recovering load and stability, it becomes clumsy and inaccurate. The air flow under the car breaks easily, reducing the efficiency of the diffuser and also affecting the rear wing. All this makes the car not only slow, but also not react to traditional adjustments that could correct these types of problems. In comparison with its main rivals, Ferrari is far behind in aerodynamic career management. While McLaren, for example, has refined each element of its design to ensure consistency along a batch, Ferrari seems to have opted for concepts that work in wind tunnels and simulations, but that are not properly translated into track. This disconnection between theory and practice has left the SF-25 in an extremely delicate position, with an aerodynamic concept that cannot take advantage of its own virtues and also amplifies its defects. Instead of being a car that progressively reacts to changes, SF-25 seems rather an incomplete experiment that demands a deep review. One of the most frustrating features of the SF-25 is its completely unpredictable behavior under changing conditions. In modern Formula One, all equipment designs their cars to perform with some consistency throughout different sessions, temperatures, and adhesion levels. However, Ferrari has encountered a car that seems to have a different personality every time he faces a slightly different environment. In circuits such as Shanghai or Albert Park, where the track conditions changed abruptly for rain or temperature, the SF-25 showed a performance variability that baffled both engineers and pilots. The real problem arises when even the team itself understands why the car behaves as it does in certain situations. There are batches in which the car seems competitive during the first laps, but then loses performance for no apparent reason. On other occasions, the reaction to the change of minor compounds or adjustments is so disproportionate that any planned strategy is disarmed. This level of inconsistency forces Ferrari to constantly improvise, to adjust configurations reactively instead of proactive, and to depend on ideal conditions to have a minimal hope of performance. The most worrying thing is that this unpredictability is not limited to extreme climate weekends or technical circuits. Even in theoretically favorable environments, the car responds erratically when variables are introduced such as different fuel levels, asymmetric wear of tires, or small changes in the setup. This compromises all long-term planning and makes it impossible to build a solid performance base on which the car evolves. Leclerc and Hamilton must adapt their piloting drastically between sessions, which breaks any consistency and confidence that they could develop with the car. This volatile behavior also negatively affects strategic decision-making. When a team cannot predict how your car will react to different scenarios, it loses the capacity to anticipate, one of the key factors in the current Formula One. And without a reliable pattern of car behavior, there is no simulation or data analysis that can save a strategy. What is at stake here is not only speed, but the team's own capacity to compete with intelligence. Beyond the technical problems that drag the SF-25, there is a structural aspect that explains a good part of its deficiencies: the lack of a coherent and sustained technical direction in time. Ferrari's car for 2025 is, in many ways, the result of a fragmented design process, marked by leadership transitions and decisions taken without a long-term global vision. The march of Enrico Cardiel in the middle of the previous season left a difficult emptiness to fill in the technical area, just when a clear guide was needed to define the evolution of the car. In its absence, the SF-25 was built as a mixture of inherited ideas and improvised solutions that do not fit together. That disconnection between the intention of the design and its final execution is perceived in each car component. The car tries to adopt modern concepts, such as greater aerodynamic freedom or a revised rear suspension, but all this is mounted on a technical basis that was not rethinked from scratch. It is more than an evolutionary registration, than an orderly revolution. That lack of conceptual rupture prevents SF-25 from having a clear identity. It is neither a completely new car nor is a reliable evolution of the SF-24. It is, rather, a hybrid creature that inherits both the vices of the past and the uncertainties of the present, and that shows when the time comes to push to the limit. Instability in the technical structure has also hindered the creation of efficient internal processes. Without a strong figure that makes technical decisions based on an integral philosophy of the car, the key areas of development and order, suspension, electronics have worked with partially misaligned criteria. This translates into solutions that do not complement each other, but often neutralize or generate new complications. Instead of adding forces, Ferrari's different technical departments have been trying to solve their problems in isolation, and the result is a car that, together, is not up to its ambition or its budget. This legacy of decisions made without cohesion has led Ferrari to a critical situation in the 2025 season. The team not only has to solve problems in the present, but also deal with the consequences of planning errors that date back to the previous year. It is a double load that slows any significant advance. While other equipment advances with a stable technical structure and a clear evolutionary plan, Ferrari is still trying to define what type of car wants to have. And in a championship as competitive as the current Formula One, that lack of clarity is not forgiven. Ferrari is not simply facing a bad start to the season. What lives in 2025 with the SF-25 is a substantive crisis that covers from the technical to the structural. The car, conceived as an ambitious evolution, has ended up revealing deep failures that compromise their competitiveness in a generalized way. From a rear suspension that breaks the dynamic balance, passing through an operating window almost impossible to control, to an aerodynamics that collapses in the race, everything indicates that the project has been born with too serious mistakes to be corrected with simple adjustments. To this is added the enormous unpredictability of car behavior under different conditions. Ferrari cannot trust his car even in the most basic aspects. Neither in the passage by curve, nor in the traction, nor in the response to the change of compounds. This leaves the exposed team to lose every strategic opportunity and forces him to constantly improvise. And as if this were not enough, the lack of a strong technical direction since the origin of the project has prevented consolidating a clear identity. The SF-25 is not the result of a coherent philosophy, but of disconnected decisions taken in the midst of transitions and urgencies. The most worrying thing is that none of these deficiencies can be resolved quickly. It is not a matter of adjusting the wing or changing the adjustments in a weekend. Ferrari will need to redesign key components and deeply review its technical structure if you want to reverse the course in this same season. And that, in a calendar as demanding as that of 2025, where the points are disputed every week, it is a task that brings the impossible without an immediate restructuring. Today, Ferrari runs the risk of being trapped in anyone's land, far from the performance of McLaren, Red Bull, or Mercedes, but with too much potential to settle for being the fifth force of the championship. If they do not act decision, this could be another lost season for Ferrari. The question is not whether Ferrari can improve, but if you can do it on time to prevent this project from ending up being one of the greatest technical failures in its recent history.